Hello property investors, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about water saving tips, and I want to get straight to the point and say that the best way to save on water is to make sure that people are accountable for their usage. So for me, especially on a rental property, you should never be including your water and your lights or your water and your electricity in your rental value. So however possible, you need to rather invest up front to put in place ways that you can obviously bill your tenants for their consumption. So a very good starting point on that is to obviously have meters that are then recording how much is being consumed for that tenant themselves, to make sure that they're responsible for paying for their consumption. It's very tempting to go, well, hey, my granny cottage that I'm going to rent out, or this apartment that I'm going to rent out, doesn't have a water meter, so therefore I'm just going to include it in the rental amount. So that becomes like the easy way out. The only problem is you then have no control around how much is being consumed by that tenant, and that tenant has no idea what the cost of that water is, so they're not going to respect that water, and they're going to basically either abuse it, so where they use more than they would normally use because, hey, it's free, why should I worry? Or they're going to not be responsible around things that are leaking. So if there's a leaking toilet, if there's a dripping tap, that sort of thing, they're never going to report that to you because, hey, it's free, why should I worry? So for me, that's the starting point. Make sure that your tenants are paying for what they are going to use, or paying for what they are using when it comes to water. Because when I'm paying for something, I am aware that it isn't free, and therefore I respect it a lot more. I'm going to take that up a level higher to say that one of my favorite ways to manage utilities or to manage water is through a prepaid water meter. And there's two very big reasons for it. Is, again, matching. So the first reason would be matching that idea of making your tenant accountable for what they use. So if they know what they use, or if they know the expense or the cost of that water, they're going to be very mindful of how much it costs to obviously make sure that the taps have running water when they open them. So for me, that changes their habits, changes their mindsets, and they respect the water a huge amount more by knowing and having a prepaid meter. So if I put in 100 Rand into this prepaid water meter, I know that it should last me a week. If it runs out tomorrow, then obviously we've been irresponsible and we haven't looked after how much water we're using. So I need to talk to my family, I need to talk to my kids, I need to make sure that they respect the cost of water. They don't leave taps open while they're brushing their teeth, that sort of thing. So that becomes such a good tool for training people to change their habits as far as the consumption goes. If they're paying up front, they respect what's coming out of the taps afterwards. So that's the first side of it, first reason I love prepaid water meters. The other reason is, if I load 100 Rand onto that prepaid water meter and there's a burst pipe while I'm out at work, it means that the only loss of water that I'm going to have is what's already loaded onto that prepaid meter. So the prepaid meter works in a way that you load your credits, so you load a quantity of units onto the meter. So you buy 100 Rand, you get a token with, say, 5 or 6 units. You then load that token onto the meter. It loads the meter with 5 or 6 kiloliters, and that means you'll use those 5 or 6 kiloliters. If there's a burst pipe, the only loss you're going to have on the property is those units that are loaded onto the meter. It's not going to become a runaway loss. So where there's two reasons that's a benefit is, obviously, if your tenant's at work and there's a burst pipe, that water is just going to be gushing. The tenant is never going to say like, oh, sorry, I'm renting the property, so I'm responsible for that water that's lost. They're going to turn it on you. They're going to go, no, your pipe burst. I didn't use the water. I'm not paying. You must pay, Mr. Landlord. So again, it becomes your responsibility as the property investor, where you don't want to have that situation happening. So if the meter turns off when it runs out of that credit, you know that the maximum loss is 100 Rand, maybe the tenant's going to cry and say, oh, I loaded 100 Rand this morning and it all washed away. You can go, okay, sorry, Mr. Tenant, I'm going to refund you the 100 Rand. So that, like, if you are in that position, you're then able to be generous with your tenant because it's not now a couple thousand Rand during the day. The same thing would happen if there's a burst geyser. The other benefit to a prepaid meter in this situation is if the burst geyser is in the ceiling, obviously the water is going to continue to flow through that geyser because it's not a pressurized vessel anymore. If it's burst, the water's leaking out of it, and that water's just going to carry on flowing. Whereas when it's a whole geyser that's not burst, it's a pressurized vessel, once it's full, the water stops flowing. But now when it's burst, it just continues to flow. So for me, that becomes a problem because again, it's just water gushing through it. You're going to be responsible for paying for that wasted water. And then the worst case scenario is maybe the geyser tray, the tray underneath the geyser that catches water in the event that there is a burst geyser, that tray could sometimes end up getting blocked. Sometimes there'll be pests in the ceiling, so be it a rat or a mouse, they often end up making nests in those trays. And when the water then starts flowing into that tray, it will pick up that nest and it will wash that nest down the pipe, the overflow pipe, which will then block that pipe, which means the tray then overflows, and it then overflows onto the ceiling of your apartment or on the ceiling of your property, which will then damage that ceiling. Eventually that fills with water, the whole ceiling will then collapse. If you've got wooden floors, carpets in that room underneath the geyser, those carpets are then damaged and destroyed. So you can see like this ripple effect of that impact of a leaking geyser in the event that there's no valve that turns off automatically when there is a leak. So for me, super important solution is to make sure you put in place a prepaid meter because of those dual benefits. The first benefit being what I know I'm paying for, I respect more. So obviously you're changing the habits in the tenants. And the second reasoning is if there is something that goes wrong, you now know that it's going to limit the loss, it's going to limit the damage. So I think that's a huge benefit for using prepaid water meters. Now, over and above that, again, it's really important to make sure you've got a maintenance plan in place for your properties. So I've spoken about it over the months that we've been going through this facilities management program, is maintenance is key for the upkeep of your property. So if you've got leaking taps in the property, it is best practice to make sure that you have those taps repaired. A leaking tap isn't a big job to repair. It is something, and I really do encourage you as a property investor to learn how to replace the rubbers on a tap, or in the newer taps where we've got mixers, learn how to replace the cartridge in those mixers. So you're able to visit the property, oh, there's a leaking tap, go get your tools quickly from your boot, change that rubber in the tap. There we go, the tap's not leaking. That will reduce the impact of a leaking tap. Another more advanced thing that you also need to be able to upskill yourself on would be leaking toilets. So that would be a case of where the float mechanisms in the toilet that actually stops the water when the cistern is full. There'll be sometimes a blockage in the jets or in the float, or there'll be something that causes that automatic switch off on the toilet system to stop working the way it should be. You need to sort of upskill yourself in that as well. Do I need to replace this whole mechanism in the system? Is it just a case of I need to clear the line? That sort of thing. It really makes so little sense for you to send out a plumber at a call-out fee to just go and clear a blockage in the line that's causing it to leak. So I really do encourage you to learn how to deal with that sort of thing yourself. And obviously, when you're growing your portfolio, you don't want to be called out to 100 different leaking toilets. So build your power team. You want to have a maintenance person who has that skill set, or a caretaker who can do that. So upskill your staff on properties. Okay, so those are general as far as maintenance goes, how to conserve water. We're obviously aware of the idea of trying to reduce the consumption on the water on the property. So things like that are heavy water users are your toilets. So reducing the level of water in the cistern on the toilets. The older style toilets had massive tanks. We're now going to, like, the more modern toilets have smaller tanks. There's the dual flush option where you can have if it's just a case of someone's gone to the toilet for a number one, there's a small button that you push, it only drains a little bit of water. If they've gone for a number two, it's the big button, and it then flushes a larger amount of water. So that's a nice way to save on water. So upgrading your toilets in a property that you're wanting to reduce consumption can often be a short-term expense, but it will be a long-term cost saving from that perspective. Okay, and then there's also tricks, like people talk about putting bricks into those bigger cisterns. So you're not reducing the volume or the height of the water in that cistern. You're reducing the amount of water that's in the system, because that brick takes up some of the volume in the cistern itself. And yeah, so you're looking at solutions like that, rolling back. Another very good one, especially when you're in the process of doing renovations, that sort of thing, for your rental properties, is understanding where your most frequent hot water usage points will be. So, and trying to make sure that your geyser is as close as possible to those points. The last thing you want is a tenant who's now taking a shower and the water now needs to run for 5 minutes, wasting liters and liters of water down the drain while they're waiting for the water to get hot. Likewise, if they're wanting to wash the dishes in the kitchen on the other side of the property, are they then running through 5 liters of water and wasting that much water? So if you're in that position where your bathrooms are on one end of the property, really too far away, and your kitchen's on the other end of the property, have a look at how long or how many liters it takes for the hot water to reach that point, and make the assessment. A general rule of thumb is if it takes more than 5 liters of water before the water starts to get hot, then you need to think of another solution. So solutions can be move your geyser closer to the bathroom as phase one, and then where your kitchen is, have an under sink geyser in your kitchen under the kitchen sink, which is then instantly supplying hot water to the kitchen sink. So you're then splitting that consumption, where your hot water isn't coming from one geyser sort of in a midpoint where it's wasting 5 liters one direction, wasting 5 liters another direction. You need to make that kind of assessment on that. And then it's looking at the bigger picture of like your garden taps. So making sure garden taps, if it is a property that you want the landscaping to really thrive, then relook at that. Put JoJo tanks in place that are collecting rainwater, and you're then using the JoJo water for the gardens. There's no reason for you to use drinkable water to water the garden. So I do encourage that from a garden tap perspective, and I'm really in favor of the fact that I would prefer not to have garden taps on my properties. I don't want tenants to be abusing and washing their cars on the property. There's 2 reasons for that. Is obviously high consumption on water, and then 2, it does create some kind of damage to the property, be it your paving, your stormwater drains, and that aren't really made to handle that kind of soap and dirt. So I prefer to try and keep the car washing away from my properties, because there's going to be some impact as a result of that. So that's really wrapping up today. As I say, for me, the most important thing is to make sure that tenants are paying for what they're going to use. Really, 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 I emphasize the idea, never include water and lights in your rental amount, in your rental or in your lease. Rather build them separately, make sure your tenants are paying for their water. And for me, the first prize is the prepaid water, because if you pay up front, you're 100% aware of how much each liter of water costs. And if you have an incident where there's a burst pipe, it gives that lock off, that switching off of the water, which a lot of people aren't aware of. If it runs out of credit, it literally turns off the water and no water will flow to the property. So for me, that's a huge benefit. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you at the next one.